welcome back to all of you here in Stockholm and across the globe online. Well, to set the stage for our next prominent keynote speaker, we have Professor of Education from Linköping University. He's also a member of the World Anti-Bullying Forum Scientific Committee. And, of course, a true expert of moral and social psychological, sorry about that, processes around that is associated with bullying. So, let's give him a big hand, Professor Robert Thornburg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have the pleasure to introduce the next keynote speaker, Rosario Ortega Ruiz, and she is a professor of psychology, and she is currently an emerita professor of the University of Córdoba in Spain and the director of the Laboratory for the Study of Convivencia and Violence Prevention. She has over 30 years of research experience on the field of interpersonal relations, social-emotional and moral competence development, as well as on children's play and social and moral cognition. On the last 25 years, she has led research on unjustified violence, school violence, bullying and cyberbullying, and dating violence and how it can harbor violence and lead to the psychogenesis of gender violence. She is an author of over 100 scientific journal articles and 15 books. Her international work included more than 10 European project and research and psychoeducational interventions in Latin America. Unfortunately, she couldn't be present today, but she has pre-recorded her keynote speech, and the title of her keynote is The Fourth Criterion, Looking for a Proof of Concept on Bullying as an Immoral Phenomenon. Even though Dr. Ortega Ruiz can't hear me, but I don't know, maybe she is online or she will listen afterwards, I still want to say we are happy to have you here and eager to listen to your keynote. The floor is yours, so give her a big hand.
The fourth criterion, looking for a proof of concept on bullying as an immoral phenomenon, by Professor Rosario Ortega Ruiz and Dr. Eva Romera. Aggressiveness and morality. Both are universal characteristics of the human species. Both are basic aspects of individual and groups development. Both are patterns of individual behavior with a great impact on social and cultural dimensions. Both are drivers of civilization and part of the scientific field of psychology. But each one had a different trajectory and status on the scientific field of psychology. Aggressiveness has a naturalistic status that gives us universal knowledge. Morality has a sociocultural status that gives us complex knowledge. The neuroscience perspective of social sciences can give us a better approach about the relationship between aggressiveness and morality. The trajectory of the study of aggressiveness. Aggressiveness has been studied as an adaptive pattern derived from the survival instinct and destined to dominate through struggle the difficulties that the outside world imposes on the immaturity of the offspring of human beings. This has been seen as one more sign of the animal condition of the human being, as well as an expression of its social nature. The struggle and rivalry with the other, who aspires to impose its own needs, seem to have endowed the human being with competence to satisfy its needs, and also its desires and ambitions, both individually and in group. Learning to differentiate oneself from others seems to be at the origin of modulating the aggressive instinct, by the socialization process. Socialization is largely facing the task of adapting to the group and strengthening as a gregarious individual. Socializing schemes derived from the aggressiveness pattern display psycho-evolutionary processes based on the control of certain emotions, such as anger, defense, flight, etc. Morality and civilization. Convivencia as an ethical reference. Civilization is the result of assuming the ethical mandate as warranty of the maintenance of the common well-being and human progress. Psychological devices of sensitivity, reasoning, and moral behavior are present on individuals as normative patterns, assuming pathologies as deviation from a common pattern. An ethical referent illuminates both sensitivity, reasoning, and moral conduct, as well as the process of socialization. The ethical and cultural reference in the socializing process are specified in the day-to-day through interpersonal relationships and in the norms to living together, convivencia. In Spanish culture, convivencia expresses the scenario where normative rules, including moral sensitivity, moral reasoning, and moral behavior, take place. Convivencia has some tools to deploy common well-being and to prevent interpersonal violence. Ethic, morality, and aggression. The universal prohibition of doing harm to others, and particularly inside of the interpersonal relationships, refers to ethics as a paradigm of the morality in the socialization process. The prohibition of harming others and other social norms are not single conventions. They are ethical rules and values on the basis for socialization along child development. Aversion to interpersonal harm to others is part of the development of the moral competence. Harm to others without any justification, proactive aggression, repeatedly destroys convivencia and builds cynic moral criteria. But bullying is a phenomenon of interpersonal violence, physical, verbal, and relational, that does not have an adaptive purpose and seems to be out of the ethical values. Bullying seems to go against the naturalistic principle of aggressiveness and also against the socialization principles that encourage a kind of cynical morality. Research on bullying and morality. Bullying is basically an unjustified and immoral behavior, repetition and intention of harming others, and one that impacts on the anti-ethical principles and values included in convivencia. Research on bullying has over 50 years, and more recently it includes cyberbullying. Although bullying is not normative, there is bullying in every kind of school, rich and poor, small and large, good and bad. Roles, aggressor, victim, defender, reinforcer, bystander, and interpersonal relationships give bullying its nature as a school phenomenon. But studies of morality and bullying have a short history. We need to connect morality, including the ethic inspiration of the social rules, and aggressiveness, particularly the unjustified aggressive behaviors of the interpersonal violence. Two key concepts: empathy and moral disengagement. Empathy and moral disengagement are the two key concepts of looking for the complex interactions between unjustified aggression and morality inside bullying and cyberbullying. Empathy is the ability to put yourself in the place of the other and perhaps understand their vision. But we need to know how it works by acting morally, avoiding the harm to others. Many studies point out that aggressors of bullying have a lower level of empathy, both cognitive and emotional, but also victims have been found to express low level of empathy. Only defenders seem to show high level of empathy. But can we trust empathy to explain the interpersonal and psychological nature of bullying? Neuroscience is starting to suggest that empathy and socialization can lead to an understanding of harm to others. From the cognitive side, it has been highlighted the weaknesses of empathy as a driver of unjustified aggression. To be on the shoes of the other is not to be the other. Moral disengagement mechanisms allow the individuals to eliminate, if they want, the emotional stimuli to produce a false version of the situation, avoiding moral emotions such as guilt and shame. This has made of moral disengagement some sort of paradigm for the functioning of immorality that is part of unjustified aggression. But moral disengagement does not explain the conduct of aggression, but the cognitive process that happens later in order to justify the anti-ethic aggression and avoid negative moral emotions such as guilt and shame. Moral disengagement does not explain the social interaction, neither the understanding of the norms and the function of the ethical principles and its values in order to not harm the others. We need to understand the individual and the social motives that guide the intention to harm another in an unjustified and immoral way, thus breaking the convivencia and the shared well-being. New questions about morality and bullying. Neuropsychology points out that the moral sensitivity, moral judgment, and moral motivation focus of the moral action skills. The triune ethics theory is an example of how morality is included on the social brain functioning. Even more, we also need to explain the way of individual processes such as cognition, emotion, behavior of immorality, and how interpersonal and social factors work to maintain bullying and cyberbullying over time and its effects, how empathy and moral disengagement work together on the cases of bullying and cyberbullying. Our advances on this direction. Searching the previous literature, we have found the complexity of the concept of morality and its dimensions. The moral knowledge, sensitivity, emotions, reasoning, motivation, identity, and group norms. Moral disengagement in bullying and cyberbullying. In spite of characteristics of online communication versus direct communication, moral disengagement strategies are associated with both bullying and cyberbullying. Cognitive restructuring is the single strongest predictor of both behaviors. Moral disengagement mechanisms operate in the same way when boys and girls bully others. The risk of being involved in bullying is higher in young students with high cognitive restructuring levels. Need for popularity, moral disengagement, and bullying. Reciprocal association. In a 4-wave study, we explored the longitudinal association between moral disengagement, need for popularity, and bullying. The results reveal potentially causal precedents of the need for popularity as a driver of bullying and moral disengagement. A cross-lag analysis revealed that moral disengagement does not predict the causal effect on bullying. These works open a theoretical challenge in the study of the developmental issue of motivational mechanisms involved in bullying and moral disengagement, as discussed in this article. Does bullying impact on moral disengagement and empathy? A 3-wave longitudinal study showed that aggressive behavior in bullying was inversely related to affective and cognitive empathy. The results show that distortion of the consequences was the only mechanism of moral disengagement which mediated between the sustained aggression and the levels of cognitive and affective empathy. It may be because it's a mechanism that affects self-perception of harm to others. These results reinforce the close ties between cognitive and affective empathy and moral disengagement strategies, and show that the deterioration of empathy and high levels of moral disengagement may be the consequence of a culture of unjustified aggression. Only aggressors disengage morally? A longitudinal 3-wave study showed that cognitive restructuring mediated the association between victimization and subsequent bullying. The results of this study suggest that victimized adolescents may form a distorted interpretation of their own victimization. Yet, victims downplay the importance of the ethics of this behavior and reframe it as a normative feature of peer relationships. The experience of being victimized appears to lead them to believe that they have been taught a valuable lesson. And that lesson is that it's better to be a bully, to hold the power. Do victims, aggressors, and passive bystanders learn cynical morality? Is bullying a scenario of perpetuating immorality and breaking the ethical commitment? Our current research challenges. 2 questions. Are moral disengagement strategies, such as cognitive restructuring, moral minimization of responsibility, distortion of the consequences, and dehumanization, stable? Does empathy mediate the relationship between severe aggressions and moral disengagement? First results indicate that severe aggression is related to the 4 moral disengagement strategies, at least during 12 months. But what do we find regarding empathy and moral disengagement? We found that affective empathy mediates cognitive restructuring and minimization of self-responsibility. But cognitive empathy did not have any mediating effect. We conclude that the continuity of cyberbullying aggression maintains moral disengagement strategies over time and increases moral disengagement, but does not explain the role of cognitive empathy. Looking for a proof of concept. Why are schools the scene of unjustified immoral aggressive behavior? Perhaps because school children find their groups of moral reference there? Perhaps because the social and normative adjustment does not function with the cognitive and sentimental coherence? Perhaps because the acquisition of the moral criteria does not include moral sensitivity and empirical evidence of immoral behavior? Perhaps because the ethics of reference is abusive and immoral and desacralizes the moral disengagement and cools the affective and cognitive empathy? Much more research is needed. But the focus should be on the fact that we're working with a social behavior that is immoral, and that this requires including the analysis of convivencia as a complex scenario that includes the ethic dimension on the normative adjustment. Essentially, is bullying basically an immoral behavior? We are looking for the answer in the peer group and culture where ethic is formed. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Rosario Ortega Ruiz, for sharing that with us. And to discuss Rosario's findings, I would like you to welcome back on stage Robert Thornburg, and also Jingu Kim and Simona Caravita. Welcome. Give them a big hand. Please take a seat. How are you?
Well, thank you so much. It's great to have the chance to comment this important speech.
Yes. So, Simona, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, of course. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Simona Caravita from Stavanger University in Norway, and I'm studying bullying, morality, and also ethnic bullying.
Thank you. And Jingu, would you also like to set the stage a little bit? What do you?
Yeah, nice to meet you. My name is Jingu Kim. I'm Excellence Fellow at Radboud University in the Netherlands. And at the moment, I'm working on the concept of peer community, which is kind of classroom climate, and doing some kind of close cultural studies. Nice to meet you.
And Robert, we know you by now. So a question to all of you, really. As we heard Rosario talk about, she's talking about bullying as an immoral action. What is your comment about that? Would you like to start?
Yes, of course, I think that she got totally the point, and also Dorothy this morning remembered to all of us that bullying is also a question of social justice. And actually, as it was pointed out very well by Rosario in her speech, children, all the human beings are naturally moral creatures. And we need, by the way, to feed this ability of children to be empathic and to be fair, and that makes very much important the role of teachers, adults, and also peers. Moral disengagement, for instance, can be learned, unfortunately, from peers, but especially by adults and teachers. So we need really to work on that.
And Jingu, Kim, would you like to
I want
share
to
with us?
point out the role of peers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, moral disengagement is kind of also a group process. And when it actually happens, peer play a crucial role as a role model. Also, salient peer, such as popular youth, they often be influential. What kind of judgment is normative in the classroom? So it would be like a future direction to push a bit more forward to the French dynamic, or what kind of, like, for instance, one of the Robert topic is like collective self-efficacy or more disengagement. It's kind of influential how youth shape their more sense of more competence.
And Robert, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's actually two kinds of answers. There is a very simple and straightforward answer, and there is a more complicated answer. The first one, the most straightforward one, is yes. Simple yes.
Yes, I agree.
Bullying is an immoral action. I mean, if you define morality very broadly as conceptions of human welfare, justice, caring, and human rights, and regulation of actions that affect others in these terms, it's obvious that repeatedly doing harm to one in a weaker position is a moral transgression. I mean, it's breaking the societal norms. It's violating the UN Convention on the children's right, including protection from violence, the right to live in a safe environment, and the right to have an education. And we have also done research in Sweden in which we have asked kids themselves. We have given them scenarios of of transgressions, including bullying behaviors, and asked them to respond. And what we find consistently is that these school kids, they judge bullying as seriously wrong, and wrong independently of school rules, and they justify their judgments by referring to the harm it causes the victim. The more complicated answer then, well, it is also an academic question about what is morality. Morality can be a very tricky concept. If you are studying moral philosophy, you will very soon realize that the only thing that moral philosophers can agree upon when it comes to morality is that they can't agree upon what morality is. There is a number of normative ethical traditions, such as virtue ethics, deontological ethics, consequentialism, ethics of care, etc., etc., etc. So there is a never-ending debate among them, both within the traditions and between them. But I have to say that if you argue that bullying is about violating social justice, compassion, and human rights, including children's rights, yes, this is about an immoral phenomenon.
Well, unfortunately, we're already out of time. This is such an interesting topic. Of course, we could discuss it all day and all night long. And I'm sure we will continue to do that. If you want to pass out the question to everybody in the audience now, because now we have a break coming up, also for you online. For half an hour, we will have a Swedish fika. Any one of you that would like to send out a question that we could debate during this fika? A question that we should talk about more?
Yes, thank you so much. I think that during these 3 days, it came out very well how much bullying is a question also of morality. So maybe the next step is about the intervention. Morality, as it was explained very well by Robert now, is a very complex construct. It relates to individuals and also peers, teachers, context. So how we can address in the intervention also this important root of bullying behavior, and how we can prevent bullying, also working on morality.
excellent question. How can we prevent bullying? Let's talk about that in the next couple of 30 minutes. We will be back here at 10:30. And thank you very much again, Simona, Jingo, and Robert. See you back here in 10:30.